Hi friends! Today we are doing Unit 1, Lesson 13, The Return of Toad, Part 2. We're going to start by going over the vocabulary that you will hear in today's story. Our first word is deafening, which means extremely loud. Our second word is expedition, which is a journey made for a particular purpose. Our next word is immense, which means tremendous, very large, or great. Our next word is modest, which means humble, not boastful. Our next word is sentinels, which are sentries or guards, people who stand watch. We are now going to move into today's reading. Toad was quite alarmed at Badger's serious style of greeting, but the rat whispered to him, "Never mind, he's always despondent when he's hungry." They waited in silence, and presently there came another knock. The rat, with a nod to Toad, went to the door and ushered in Mole. "Hooray! Here's old Toad!" cried the Mole. "Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever Toad!" The rat, alarmed, pulled him by the elbow, but it was too late. Toad was puffing and swelling already. "Clever? Oh no," Toad said. "I'm not really clever, according to my friends. I've only broken out of the strongest prison in England, that's all, and catched a railway train, and escaped on it, that's all." "Well, well," said the Mole, moving towards the supper table. "Supposing you talk while I eat, not a bite since breakfast." And he sat down and helped himself to cold beef and pickles. Toad straddled the hearthrug, thrust his paw into his trouser pocket, and pulled out a handful of silver. "Look at that!" he cried, displaying it. "That's not so bad, is it, for a few minutes' work?" "And how do you think I done it, Mole?" "Horse stealing, that's how I done it." "Go on, Toad," said the Mole, immensely interested. "Toad, do be quiet, please," said the rat. "And don't you egg him on, Mole. Just tell us what the position is and what's to be done, now that Toad is back." "The position's about as bad as it can be," replied the Mole. "Armed sentinels posted everywhere at Toad Hall." "It is a very difficult situation," said the rat, reflecting deeply, "but I think I see what Toad really ought to do." "No, he oughtn't," shouted the Mole. "Well, I shan't do it anyway," cried the Toad, getting excited. "I'm not going to be ordered about by you fellows." By the time they were all three talking at once at the top of their voices, when a thin, dry voice made itself heard, saying, "Be quiet," and instantly everyone was silent. It was Badger. "Toad," he said crossly, aren't you ashamed of yourself? What do you think your father would have said if he had been here tonight?" Toad was on the sofa by this time, began to sob. "There, there," went on Badger more kindly, "stop crying. We're going to let bygones be bygones. But what the Mole says is true. There are guards at every point. There is no point in trying to take the place by storm." "Then it's all over," sobbed the Toad, crying into the sofa cushions. "I shall join the army." "Come, cheer up, Toady," said the Badger. "There are more ways of getting back a place than taking it by force. Now I'm going to tell you a secret." Toad sat up and dried his eyes. Secrets had an immense attraction for him, because he could never keep one. "There is an underground passage," said the Badger, "that leads from the river bank right up into the middle of Toad Hall." "Oh, nonsense, Badger," said Toad. "I know every inch of Toad Hall." "My young friend," said the Badger, with great severity, "your father told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamt of telling you. He made me promise not to tell you about it unless you really needed to know." The other animals looked hard at Toad to see how he would take it. Toad was inclined to be sulky at first, but soon he brightened up. "Well, well," he said. "Go on, Badger. How's this passage of yours going to help us?" "I've found out," continued the Badger, "that there's going to be a banquet tomorrow night. It's somebody's birthday, and all the weasels will be gathered together in the dining hall. No weapons of any sort." "But the sentinels will be posted as usual," remarked the rat. "Exactly," said Badger. "That's my point. The weasels will trust entirely to their guards, and that is where the passage comes in. That tunnel leads right up under the butler's pantry, next to the dining hall." "We shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry," cried the Mole. "With our pistols and swords and sticks," shouted the rat. "And rush in upon them," said the Badger. "And whack 'em, and whack 'em, and whack 'em," cried Toad in ecstasy. "Very well, then," said the Badger, resuming his usual dry manner. "Our plan is settled. We will make all the necessary arrangements in the morning." Toad slept till a late hour next morning. had already had breakfast. The Mole had slipped off somewhere. The Badger was sitting reading the paper, and the Rat was organizing an enormous pile of weapons. "I think the job can be done without the need for weapons, Rat," said the Badger presently. "It's all as well to be on the safe side," said the Rat reflectively. The Toad, having finished his breakfast, picked up a stick and swung it vigorously at him. "I'll learn him to steal my house," he cried. "Don't say learn him, Toad," said the Rat. "It's not good English." "What are you always nagging at Toad for?" inquired the Badger. "What's the matter with his English? It's the same what I use myself, and if it's good enough for me, it ought to be good enough for you." "I'm very sorry," said the Rat humbly, "only I think it ought to be teach 'em, not learn 'em." "But we don't want to teach 'em," replied the Badger. "We want to learn 'em. And what's more, we're going to do it, too." "Oh, very well, have it your own way," said the Rat. Presently the Mole returned, and the four companions continued to make plans to recapture Toad Hall. When it began to grow dark, the Rat summoned them back into the parlor to prepare for the coming expedition. When all was ready, the Badger took a dark lantern in one paw, grasped a stick with the other, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, because I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last." The Toad was so anxious not to be left out that he did not protest. With Badger leading the way, they soon found themselves in the secret passage. It was cold and dark, and Toad began to shiver. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind. Then, fearful of being left alone in the dark, Toad hurried forward and bumped into Rat. The Badger thought they were being attacked and drew a pistol. He was on the point of putting a bullet into Toad when he discovered what had really happened. He was very angry and said, "Now, this time that tiresome Toad shall be left behind." But Toad whimpered, and the other two promised to look out for him. And at last the procession moved on. They shuffled along till at last the Badger said, "We ought by now to be nearly under the hall." Then suddenly they heard a confused murmur of sound as if people were cheering. The passage now began to slope upwards, and then the noise broke out again very close above them. "Oorah! Oorah! Oorah!" they heard, and the stamping of little feet. "What a time they're having!" said the Badger. "Come on." They hurried along the passage till it came to an end. There they found themselves standing under the trap door that led up into the butler's pantry. A tremendous noise was going on in the banqueting hall. There was little danger of their being overheard. The Badger said, "Now, all together," and the four of them put their shoulders to the trap door and heaved it back. Hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry. The noise they heard as they emerged from the passage was deafening. At last, as the cheering and hammering subsided, a voice could be heard to say, "Well, I should like to say one word about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad." There was laughter. "Modest Toad." There were shrieks. "Just let me get at him," muttered Toad. "Hold hard a minute," said the Badger, restraining him with difficulty. "Get ready, all of you." The Badger drew himself up, took a firm grip of his stick, glanced round at his comrades, and cried, "The hour is come, follow me!" and flung the door open wide. My, what a squealing and a screeching filled the air! Well might the terrified weasels dive under the tables, well might the ferrets rush wildly for the fireplace and the chimney therein. Well might tables and chairs be upset when the four heroes strode into the room. There were but four in all, but to the panic-stricken weasels, and before long the stoats, Toad Hall seemed full of monstrous animals, and they broke and fled with squeals of terror, and so Toad Hall was reclaimed. "Mole, you're the best of fellows," declared Badger to Mole. So impressed was he with how valiantly Mole had fought. Toad felt rather hurt that the Badger hadn't complimented him on how splendidly he had fought, but Toad put aside his jealousy and thanked Mole for his help. "Toad," said Badger, "you must have a banquet to celebrate." Thinking immediately of all the speeches he would make and songs he would sing about his own leading part in the fight, Toad puffed up with conceit once more. He became so inflated that his friends suspected right away what Toad was up to. "Now, Toad," said the Rat, "we want you to understand there are going to be no speeches and no songs, especially as your songs are all self-praise." And gas, put in the Badger. "It's for your own good, Toady," went on the Rat. "You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later." Toad thought a long while. "My friends, you shall never have occasion to blush for me again," he said. "But oh dear, this is a hard world!" And so he was indeed a changed Toad. As the weeks and months went by, many tales were told of the great siege at Toad Hall. Toad became a more thoughtful Toad, and life on the river bank continued, as did the friendships of the creatures with whom you have just become acquainted. You may now move on to Unit 1, Lesson 13, Google Form.